What's up, guys? So one of the questions that I always get, Matt, can I find a phone in the $200 price range that's a really good phone, older flagship that's going to be getting updates, whether it's security patches or major OS updates? Yes, guys, there are plenty of phones. I'm going to make a part two because I also have a ton of more phones that are in this price range as well. These phones are coming down in price and they're an excellent deal. So that's why I always tell you guys to just look at the old flagship or the used smartphone market. It's a very, very good market as far as price to spec ratio. The first phone that I think a lot of people don't pay attention to is the Pixel 6 Pro. This is an awesome phone, and Google did such a good job with the Pixel 7 Pro that it's sort of, a lot of people forgot about this phone, but this is an amazing device. I see it on eBay for around $259, and that's extremely good deal. So this phone has an aluminum frame. It's got a glass back, IP68 dust and water resistant. Very, very unique design on here. Google did a great job with the design as far as making it a very unique phone. So when you look at the back of this phone, you know it's a Pixel phone, just how the camera bar is. So I really like that. So like I said, phone IP68 dust and water resistant, and it's a flagship. When you look at it and hold it, it still looks really good. It has a beautiful display at 6.7 inches, 120 hertz HDR10 plus. It's LTPO AMOLED, and awesome display, 1440p, 512 for the PPI. Very sharp, very high quality panel on here, so it's just super smooth, especially with stock Android. The display on here is awesome. And speaking of stock Android, this phone, obviously you can get Android 13, the pure stock version, no skin on top of it, no extra apps, so just full Google experience. But also what's cool about stock Android is that when the next major OS update comes out, you're the first to get the beta software. So like Android 14, you're the first to get all of that beta software, so you're the first to check out all the new features. This phone launched with the Google Tensor chip, and it's still a very fast phone. Like I said, this phone had a shaky launch when it first launched, a lot of bugs and stuff like that. But with software updates, a lot of those bugs have been taken care of. It's a very fast and speedy phone. This phone is still very good when it comes to gaming. Still, it's not going to be as good. It's not as well optimized, I noticed, for like PUBG and stuff like that. But for the casual gamer, there's no issue with this phone at all. You can still play Call of Duty, PUBG at some pretty good settings. This phone has 128 gigs of internal storage and 12 gigs of RAM, so you can multitask on here just fine. It does an excellent job running stock Android. Now this phone has really good sounding stereo speakers as well, very good bass quality on here too. Has the under the display fingerprint sensor. It's an optical one, so it doesn't feel as fast as, let's say, like a S20 Ultra, but it's one of those ones where you have to apply a little bit of pressure, but it does work. But my only thing about this phone is there's no face unlock, unfortunately. The best thing about this phone is the cameras. This phone still has one of the best cameras that you can get, period. Take some of the best stills that you can get on a phone, especially at this price point. Is absolutely a steal. 50 megapixel standard cam, 48 megapixel telephoto. It has 4x optical zoom, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide. It shoots in 4K 60, and then 11.1 ultra wide selfie cam shoots in 4K 30. Still one of the best cameras for taking stills. The pixel image processing is just awesome. I absolutely love it. I usually use Pixel phones if I know I'm going somewhere and I'm going to take a lot of photos. This is the phone that I typically like to use, and they do a really good job with skin tones and stuff like that. I've always been a fan since the original Pixel phones. So yeah, so the cameras on here are fantastic. The video is pretty solid as well too. So if you're somebody that you want the best camera, for this price point, or these really just take the best photos to me out of all the old flagships. So definitely highly recommend a Pixel if you guys take a lot of photos. The battery life on here is pretty decent. It's nothing too crazy. It's a 5,003 milliamp hour battery, 23 watt charging, and then you also have 23 watt wireless charging and reverse wireless charging on here. You can get around 6 hours of screen on time out of this phone, so it's just an awesome deal, especially for this price. Next is going to be the S21 FE. I'm seeing these phones for around 230 to 200 bucks. Very, very cheap phone, and especially a really good deal overseas as well too. I noticed in the Indian marketplace as well, so I would definitely take a look at this phone. I did a video on it not too long ago. It's a pretty nice phone. It's got the aluminum frame and actually has a plastic back, which could be good or bad depending on what you're looking for. But like I said, it's hard to crack a plastic back. You see a lot of glass phones with cracked backs. So this phone has IP68 dust and water resistant, 6.4 inch dynamic AMOLED display, 120 Hz HDR10 plus. It's 1080p 403 for the PPI. It's a really nice display, completely flat panel on here, and I really do like this display, and I like the phone in general, the way it feels, the way the design looks. I think it looks pretty solid. This phone also has Android 13, One UI 5.1. It launched with the Snapdragon AAA processor, so that means it will get the software pledge that Samsung did with the 4 years of majorOS updates, I believe. So that's really awesome. And you also have on here 128 gigs and 6 gigs of RAM. Now, the 6 gigs of RAM was concerning to a lot of people, but they do have a 8 gig of RAM version as well too. The 6 gig of RAM version works fine for me. Playing video games, going through One UI, really wasn't that big of a deal. It still was able to multitask. Now, of course, the more RAM, the better, right? But as far as performance, I literally had no issues with this phone. And not only that, but what's interesting about this device is that a lot of these AAA phones, they get really hot. I noticed this was one of the cooler phones. It just didn't get as warm or hot when you're playing games and shooting like high res video. So that's one thing I did notice. A lot of the S21 series phones, they do tend to get a little bit hot, especially the S21 Ultra. Can get a little bit hot, more intensive stuff you do. So you also have on here really good stereo speakers on here. Under the display, fingerprint sensor works, it's fine. Samsung desktop support and pretty much all of your flagship features are here. So that's really nice. Now the camera on here, it's pretty decent. It's a 12 megapixel standard, 8 megapixel telephoto. That's 3x optical zoom, 12 megapixel ultra wide, shoots in 4K 60 on the front and back with a 32 megapixel selfie cam. So you get pretty nice resolution with the selfie cam. The images on here are pretty good for the most part. Like I said, I think the only thing with this phone is that it's got that 12 megapixel standard. So if you want to take like super high res shots, then if you crop in the photos and stuff like that, it's not going to do that good of a job as the other Samsung flagship phones. But images on here are definitely very good. It still takes really nice high quality flagship quality photos, which is something that I really like. I think the images speak for themselves. Really good color, good detail. So I really didn't have anything to complain about with the cameras on here. Now, this phone actually had some pretty good battery life. 4,500 milliamp hour battery, 25 watt wireless charging, and reverse wireless charging. I was pretty impressed with the battery life, especially compared to the standard S21. So yeah, even the S22, those two phones. So these phones tend to do a little bit better with battery life, and I believe the battery is actually bigger than the standard S21. I think the S21, yeah, it's a 4,000 milliamp battery, so you can definitely feel it a little bit for sure. All right, next is the iPhone XS. This is a fantastic phone. It's the only $200 iPhone that I would recommend. The only other phone that's in this $200 range is the XR. I would still recommend this over the XR and the SE 2020. And it's also getting iOS 17 as well too, which is pretty sweet. And what's kind of sucks with that is that they killed off the iPhone 8 Plus and the iPhone 10, unfortunately. So this is one of the, I think, the oldest phones to be able to run iOS 17. Now this design is one of my favorite designs, I think, from Apple. I just really like the very clean, classy look, and also the edge of the phones. They're not as sharp as the newer iPhones as well too, so it's easier to hold in the palm. So this phone has a pretty good display still. It's a 5.8 inch Super Retina OLED display. It is 1125 by 2436, so basically 1080p plus. 458 for the PPI, and it's a very good panel, especially compared to the iPhone 11 and the iPhone XR. So this one has an OLED, those have an LCD display. So you get really good color, really deep blacks, so absolutely love that. Like I said, this phone is getting iOS 17. It has the Apple A12 chip on it as well too, so it's still a very fast phone. I was playing PUBG on it. This phone can heat up a bit. It seems like it gets kind of hot if you're doing like gaming and stuff like that, for sure. But I've never had this phone actually crash or do any frame rate drops, but definitely notice it kind of getting hot. So this phone has 64 gigs of internal storage, 4 gigs of RAM. You can get the 256 gig for just a few more dollars, so not that much. But this phone has pretty good stereo speakers. Face ID still works as you would expect. And also you do have pretty decent cameras, a 12 megapixel standard and a 12 megapixel telephoto that does 2x optical zoom. So that's sort of the thing about this phone. Most people probably might prefer an ultra wide, which this phone does not have. It's got 4K 60 video, 7 megapixel selfie that shoots in 1080p 60. The cameras on here are pretty decent. Like I said, if you get it in good lighting, it takes a pretty decent shot. I actually compared the 10s to the 14 Pro if you guys want to check that out. Now, my battery health is around 85%, I believe. So this phone can get still pretty decent battery life. I was able to get almost close to 6 hours of screen on time. It's got a 2658 milliamp battery, 15 watt wired charging and wireless charging. So the battery situation is pretty decent depending on your battery health. But overall, this is still a pretty fantastic phone for around 200 bucks flat. Next is the S20 Ultra, which I would definitely keep watching this phone because it should come down in price even more. It's around 267 right now on eBay, and it fluctuates on Amazon, but I can see this easily as we get closer to the end of the year coming down to around 250 240 bucks. This is an awesome flagship, and this one is still getting security updates as well too. It got its last major OS update, Android 13. And yeah, I still really like the design of this phone. I actually did a video not too long ago. It's got an aluminum frame, glass back, it's IP68 dust and water resistant. And I just think this phone is really easy to hold compared to the Galaxy Note phones and stuff like that. So just way more easy to hold, even though it's a massive phone at 6.9 inches. It's got the dynamic AMOLED display, 120 Hz HDR10 plus, 1400 nits peak brightness, and it's 511 for the PPI. Again, you can only use the 120 Hz at 1080p, unfortunately. But it's still a very, very good display. Absolutely love the display. It's got the Snapdragon 865 chip, one of my favorite chips. It's still blazing fast. You can play PUBG at 90 frames still, Call of Duty. Everything is just really fast on this phone. And also it has micro SD card support as well too. So that's a good thing about these older flagships is that you can get micro SD card support, and you can get a Note 20 Ultra, which is going to be a little bit more for sure, or Note 10 Plus. These older phones, because I know a lot of people want SD card support, I would definitely still buy these phones for sure. 128 gigs of internal storage, 12 gigs of RAM on here. Also has stereo speakers as well too, which sound pretty good. You also have all of your flagship features, Samsung desktop support, under the display fingerprint sensor. The ultrasonic is super fast. This phone still has a pretty good camera. Like I said, if you guys watched my video, I really thought the cameras were pretty good, and also I compared it to the S23 Ultra, and it's it did a really good job. 108 megapixel standard lens, 48 megapixel periscope telephoto, does 4x optical zoom, and then you have a 12 megapixel ultra wide, and then you have the 0.3 depth sensor. This was the first phone to introduce the 100 times zoom as well too, which is pretty sweet. So you can get those really cool moon shots. And you also can shoot an AK-24 and a 40 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 4K 60. So like I said, I'm a big fan of the cameras on here. I think they still look really good, especially if you're in good lighting. You really almost can't tell the difference between this and a newer phone. Alright, so this phone does have a 5000 milliamp battery with 45 watt charging, which is pretty nice. And then wireless and reverse wireless charging is on board. So it's a pretty cool phone, like I said, and I expect this one to come down in price a lot. Last is the OnePlus 9, which this phone gets overlooked a lot, but I really liked this phone when I first picked it up. It's literally around 200 bucks right now, and it's a really, really good phone for 200 bucks. So this phone has a glass back. It actually has a plastic frame on it, but it still feels like a premium device. Still looks like a premium device as well too. And you also have IP68 only on the T-Mobile version, I believe. And then this one has a 6.5-inch Fluid AMOLED display, 120 Hz HDR10 plus, 1100 nits peak brightness, 1080p 402 for the PPI. And it's a flat panel, and it looks really good as you would expect. Very smooth, silky display. This phone, it got the Android 13 Oxygen OS 13 update, and then like I said, it has the Snapdragon 888 chip on here. So it's a blazing fast phone when it comes to performance. Just really, really fast. Also, gaming performance on here is very good as well too. And like I said, this is a AAA phone, and I didn't notice this one heating up as much. But it can get a little bit warm, but I noticed that it was one of the cooler phones at least. 128 gigs and 8 gigs of RAM on the base model, and then you also have stereo speakers on here, very loud, really good quality. And then you also have under the display fingerprint sensor, that's very fast. And then you also have on here, which I think is highlight is the cameras. I think the cameras are pretty good on here. It's at 48 megapixel standard. And what really stood out about the cameras was the 50 megapixel ultra wide. You get really good detailed shots with the ultra wide, which I thought was pretty cool. It has a 2 megapixel monochrome camera on here, and it has the Hasselblad color calibration on here as well too. So you get some pretty good image processing when it comes to the colors and everything. You can shoot an 8K30 with a 16 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 1080-30. Overall, the image quality, like I said, was pretty good. I think it still takes some really nice, sharp photos and does pretty decent in low light as well too. But like I said, the ultra wide was really crazy, the detail that you get, because you usually don't see high res ultra wide sensors. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And you also have a really good battery situation on here. So you have a 4500 milliamp battery, but that's not the thing. This phone came with a 65-watt charging brick. It charges really fast, from I believe from 1% to 100% in 29 minutes, which is pretty cool. And it has wireless charging as well too. So really impressive charging speeds on here. So that's pretty much it, guys. What do you guys think? Be sure to let me know, and I'll catch you guys in the next